Yeah, because the body recognizes that drop in hormones when you're going through menopause. What I was thinking about is even before you miss your first period, when your hormones are changing, your brain recognizes that.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times people are wondering what's going on with my brain. I'm so foggy. I can't remember things. And that's because their hormones have already started to decline, but they're still getting a period. Yeah. Hormones after hysterectomy. Is rhythmic dosing still possible? I'm Dr. Valorie Davidson from Progress Your Health.
And I'm Dr. Robert Maki from Progress Your Health. So I made a little bit of a mistake today. We're all set to do a podcast. We're here in the studio, and I forgot the camera mount for the tripod. So now we're doing a single camera. We haven't done actually a 3-camera setup in a little while. So I'm feeling a little stupid that we had to sort of improvise.
There's so many little pieces to doing this that, like you said, we should probably create a list. but I think it's just fine.
Yeah. No, we're rolling with it. It's all good. I was having like a moment, like, I got to go back and get it. And we were doing some recording at the house, and now I forgot to bring the most important, well, not the most important piece, but a important piece of the tripod setup. You can't do anything with the camera if you can't mount it to the tripod. So we're modifying. So I understand you got a question on TikTok that we're going to do.
Yes. So I got a comment on TikTok on one of the, I think one of my videos I did about rhythmic dosing. And she asked, if you had a total hysterectomy, can you still do this and help? So this was a video that I did about rhythmic dosing and how you're mimicking the natural cycle. And then I do rhythmic dosing myself, and that because I have a uterus, I get a period every month. So I think maybe that was a little confusing to other people thinking, oh, well, what happens if you don't have a uterus or you don't have ovaries, or, can you still do rhythmic dosing?
Sure. This is, that sort of seems like an obvious thing for you and I, right? Because obviously we're the practitioners. So, it's easy to sort of categorize people or who's a candidate, who isn't. But I could see if the rhythmic dosing is intending for you to have a period, I could see where a person that wouldn't necessarily understand that if you can't have a period because you don't have a uterus anymore, that maybe it disqualifies you from being a candidate.
Yeah, exactly. But I think sometimes, what is it, the forest and the trees? Like I didn't even think about that, but that's a really valid question. So I'll have to let her know that we did a podcast on her question, because I think it's important, because I've had this question asked before. Is doing rhythmic dosing, you're basically doing estradiol and progesterone, and you're mimicking the ovarian cycle. So you're changing your hormones throughout that, 26, 28-day cycle to mimic, what nature does. Now, if you have a uterus, you want to have a period when you're doing the rhythmic dosing. We always say that because that's part of the safety, is you build up the lining of the endometrial lining, and then when it's time, because you're changing the hormones, you get a period. But if you don't have a uterus, it's really quite okay to do the rhythmic dosing in some respects. Then you don't have to worry about getting a period.
Yeah, I think,
Wait. Not that periods are bad, because they're supposed to be easy peasy when you're on the rhythmic dosing. But, it is kind of weird at 52 to say, oh, yeah, I can still get a period. I'm probably still going to continue getting one.
Yeah, sure. We've had a lot of women over the years that they're, in their 50s, 60s, and they just keep having one. And it does, it's a little bit of a head scratcher if you don't really understand what's going on there. But now a woman that has had a hysterectomy, let's say she's under menopausal age, let's say she's either in her 30s or 40s having a hysterectomy, in some ways rhythmic dosing is a perfect option for them, because their body, let's say she's even 35, her body is, or even early 40s, her body is still producing its own hormones, and all of a sudden now it's not. So her body wants that extra hormone level. The rhythmic dosing is a really good way to bridge that, that transition from, having a uterus to not having a uterus, from having hormones to be automatically put into surgical menopause.
Well, yeah, that's to clarify. So hysterectomy is just removing the uterus. If someone's having a total hysterectomy, which that's including the ovaries. So what is it? Oophorectomy is removing the ovaries. And then, total hysterectomy would be removing both the ovaries and the uterus. So what you're saying is, just because I like to pick out the details, is let's say you are 35 and you had a hysterectomy, But a lot of times doctors may actually leave your ovaries in because they're still functioning. And at that point, you wouldn't necessarily need hormones, or you'd be checking your hormones, maybe blood work or a Dutch test or something to check those levels. But if they did have that oophorectomy and hysterectomy, so a total hysterectomy, then like you're saying is going into surgical menopause, they would be the best candidates for rhythmic dosing because their bodies would still recognize those hormones. If anything, they would probably feel so much better doing that than not having anything.
Yeah, right. Of course. Now, granted, you, like I said, you just, kind of, I said, I gave a blanket statement and you sort of hashed it down, or drilled down on that a little bit. I do think the tendency is nowadays is for doctors to actually leave the ovaries. More so than, I don't know what the percentages are of how many, 100 hysterectomies, how many do they leave the ovaries and how many do not? Of course, it depends on the reason why they're having it in the first place. Of course, some kind of a problem, endometriosis or fibroids, or, heaven forbid, some kind of a cancer problem of some sort. So just to clarify what you said then, so it may not be necessary if they still have their ovaries, at least right away. Could be based on their profile or their symptomology, but certainly the one that has had a full hysterectomy, they're going to have some issues relatively quickly.
Yeah, or even like this question, that's why I really appreciated the comment on TikTok, was she asked, if you had a total hysterectomy, can you do this and can it help? And absolutely, I do feel like there's so many different ways to do hormone replacement for people, and it should be tailored to the individual, not just a cookie cutter approach. But the rhythmic dosing is a really nice way to tailor hormones for that particular person. So even if they didn't have a uterus, they didn't have their ovaries, that's just one way of doing HRT.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, granted, we've even talked about this in the community with our community members and things. It's nice to have options, right? There's a lot of different options these days, which is good. But, when it comes to, like you said, that customization, that individualization, I don't think anything really compares to the rhythmic dosing, especially for that woman who is, okay, so what would be a profile? Let's just we don't know the person on TikTok. We don't know anything about her, but let's just say in general, hypothetically, the total hysterectomy, what would be a profile of that woman that would be a good candidate for something like this?
Well, I'm going to back up a little bit. I just had a really great patient that I saw, and she still has her uterus and her ovaries, and you probably have experienced this too. But she's stuck in this sort of middle zone where her clinician is worried about giving her estrogen, because when she would take the estrogen, she would have some spotting.
Right.
When you're doing static dosing, you do not want any spotting. So then just kind of raised up her progesterone, trying to stop the spotting, and then eventually took the estrogen away. And now she's having a lot of symptoms of estrogen deficiency.
Yeah.
But her practitioner is worried, which I can totally get it. I don't want to give you estrogen because you're going to bleed. That's a risk factor. That person is I feel like a really good candidate for rhythmic dosing.
Sure.
Because then you can actually work on getting a cycle to come back and to get that period regulated. So I feel like that's an important one. And then like you were saying, in terms of somebody that's had a hysterectomy, so they had their ovaries out, they had their total hysterectomy, ovaries out, and the uterus out. That would be, I would say, a lot of women would be a good candidate for that, especially if because when you're doing the rhythmic dosing, and you know this as well as I do, it's not that it's complicated, but you have to know what day you're on. If you're on day 6, you take this much estrogen in the morning and this much at night. If you're on day 17, you take this much estrogen in the morning, this much at night, and this much progesterone at night.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of where you are in the cycle. So it does take a little bit of work. So I would say the perfect candidate would be somebody that's a little bit more meticulous, because I have myself included. I like to have my calendar. I like to know what day it is. I like to write it down. I like to write down my symptoms. Somebody like that really wants to be in tune with their body, I think would be a good candidate.
Sure. And maybe, like you said a second ago about the customization, it allows for that particular woman to be able to raise or lower the estrogen, raise or lower the progesterone based on, what she's feeling, what she wants to be feeling like, based on her symptom profile and her goals. Where with the other forms of even static dosing, conventional, bioidentical, whatever you want to call it, you don't really have that that ability to really customize it that much. Like you said, your in-betweener, right? What you described as your in-betweener profile, you know, you I can understand because we've had those situations too. Sometimes you can't give a woman estrogen, just because they start bleeding, you just can't keep giving them estrogen. And like you said, the practitioner sounds like did the right thing. You either raise the progesterone, see what happens, lower the estrogen, or both of those, see what happens. And if it's still causing the bleeding, then they're not a candidate yet for the estrogen. Where with the rhythmic dosing, then, so what's essentially happening there? Are you sort of hijacking the ovarian function when you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I always think this sounds a little cheesy, but it is like you're being your own ovary. So let's say you have the ovary removed or your ovaries are retired and they're not coming back. You're supplying those hormones into the system. The brain doesn't know that it's not coming from the ovary.
Right.
So the brain will, that follicle stimulating hormone and that luteinizing hormone that I've talked about in other podcasts, that's a signal from the brain and it recognizes those hormones in the body and it actually is acknowledging that it's in the system.
Right.
So it's one way of being able to, like I say, be your own ovary.
Sure. Well, now the hysterectomy profile, and we'll come back to that in a second, and the in-betweener one, so that woman that is in her late 40s to the early 50s, period is erratic, it's kind of hit or miss. She hasn't stopped yet for a full 12 months, so she's not technically in menopause. At least by a conventional definition. By our standards, she more than likely would be. But that person, from an estrogen standpoint, doesn't have any left, which is why her periods are erratic. And the hysterectomy, let's say in this case, to what you said, the total hysterectomy patient, let's say who's 10 years younger at 40, in some ways they're both in a little bit of a similar category there from what their estradiol levels would be on a blood test.
Yeah, because the body recognizes that drop in hormones when you're going through menopause. Now, another thing I just kind of was thinking about is even before you miss your first period, when your hormones are changing, your brain recognizes that.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times people are wondering what's going on with my brain. I'm so foggy. I can't remember things. And that's because their hormones have already started to decline, but they're still getting a period.
Yeah.
So that's where I feel like, for example, our brain uses up its own, it needs fuel, like our whole body needs fuel, is when that estrogen drops, it actually lowers the brain's ability to get that glucose and that fuel, which is why a lot of times women will say, oh, I'm so tired and I can't think or I'm foggy. Now the brain is really smart, obviously, where our bodies are pretty incredible. It will try to adapt over time. And that's why a lot of these symptoms that people have when they're going into menopause and perimenopause can be really debilitating.
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially, I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they are a financial advisor, so they're dealing with people's money, managing their money, and you got sort of perimenopause, menopause brain, and you can't really do that effectively if your brain doesn't work the way that it used to work. You used to be able to, and I know this is your situation too, or at least it was, you used to be able to rely on your brain very easily. It wouldn't let you down. It would remember details and do all the things. And all of a sudden now it just doesn't perform as well as it used to. That was sort of your rationale for, or your symptom of going into menopause.
Yeah, when I went into menopause, I didn't really have any hot flashes or night sweats, maybe a little night sweats and perimenopause.
Probably a little more irritability, I would say.
Yeah, okay. You want some irritability? But it was my memory, my brain. The words would come out a little weird, or I couldn't remember the word, and I'd have to use a different word. And and I've had other women, but it was very strange when you start to experience it yourself. And it kind of messes with your psychology a little bit.
In what way?
Well, like you were saying about the financial advisor, when you start to feel like, oh my gosh, the word isn't coming out, or what was that, or why can't I just remember because I've always had a really good memory. I can remember where people went on their trips, what their kids' names are. I just can pull that right out. When you can't do that, you kind of lose your confidence a little bit. And when you're working with people's money,
medicine, money, those are very serious things. Yeah.
I'm sure she's still amazing. I'm sure she's got her brain back, but it kind of messes with your confidence a little bit when you feel like I just can't get the word out.
Yeah. Well, then you throw in some stress and maybe some sleepless nights or, sleep disruption because of those hormonal changes. And now all that brain cognitive abilities, it just sort of gets magnified. right? So not only is it a drop in estrogen, but now it's those other secondary things that, make it even worse. And not only that, but now that sets up for other things, increasing insulin resistance, and then that whole potential problem turns into a bigger problem down the road potentially. And I know that, some of that, brain fog or the brain doesn't work the way it wants. Like a lot of women get nervous, like that's leading to Alzheimer's. I mean, it sort of could, right? But most of the time, it's nothing. It's not how Alzheimer's would typically manifest.
No, no, no. But I know I've had women across the desk from me saying, "I think I've got dementia."
Yeah.
Like, nope, it's the menopause, and that's where I feel like the rhythmic dosing for me really helped because I was able to get those physiological levels of estradiol. Now, with a biased or even lower levels or static dosing, I've had a lot of women that do really well on that for their brain,
Sure.
really well for sleep. When you're working, and you know this too, but when you're working with a client or a patient, you want to pick out what's going to be the best dose and what's going to be the best vehicle for them. So like I was saying with the rhythmic dosing, if there's somebody that's maybe a little more scattered, or you know what, I don't want something complicated. I just don't, I just want to set it and forget it, then rhythmic dosing wouldn't be for that person. Or for example, there was a new patient I saw not too long ago, and she's very petite. She's 49 years old and she's a very petite female. And my first thought was, okay, you're 49 years old. I'm thinking more when you're 69, what is your bone density going to look like? Because she's very petite. Her bone density peak mass is probably a little less just because of her body frame compared to someone else. So do I really just want to cover up some of her menopausal symptoms like hot flashes and night sweats, or even that brain fog, or do I want to go a step further so that we can really get in some of those hormones to protect the bone that she has right now?
Yeah, I know we did one on bone not that long ago, and one of the statistics that I read as we were preparing for it said that a woman can lose 20% of their bone density within the first 5 years or 5 to 7 years after menopause. So as that estrogen drops and the progesterone drops, there's a significant decrease in bone density just like that. Now you throw in some stress and some sedentary lifestyle on top of that. Now that decline is probably even more rapid. So that's why staying strong, right? Staying strong, I think, is very, very important. We're going to talk more about that as we continue. That's not necessarily what this one is about, but certainly I've done in the past as well, and I know you have. We've chosen to do rhythmic dosing specifically to sort of tackle that rhythmic dosing, or excuse me, the bone density issue. Right, they have the profile. They're just a little over 100 pounds. They have a family history. Mom had osteoporosis. They already might have a little bit of osteopenia on their DEXA already, and that scares them. They're worried about, maybe not right now when they're in their early 50s, but really you're planning for 75 plus, and you need to start planning that in your 50s to be able to make it to your. I mean, now granted, nowadays, at least our patients, they make it to 75 no problem, but everyone wants to make it there in sort of still intact, like still be able to move and have mobility and having that vibrance that if you don't do those things or prepare for those things, sometimes you don't have some of that mobility or that quality of life, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So. I don't know what I'm saying. I know what I'm saying there.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
No, it's true. In fact, I had a patient not that long ago, and she's in great shape. She's fit. She's healthy. She feels good. She eats good. Life is good for her. She's very happy, very grateful, very appreciative of her life. And her goal was, I want to stay like this. I want to keep my energy up. I want to keep my mood up. I want to enjoy the things that I enjoy. I don't want to, this to change. And that is one thing that I think doing hormones in general, whether it's rhythmic dosing or static dosing, or I really think that can really help someone continue that quality of life.
Yeah.
So and that's why, if you had a total hysterectomy, thinking of this, this person writing this comment, my first thought was, okay, well, why did they have that total hysterectomy? So you want to think about, did she have fibroids? Did she have endometriosis? Did she have cysts on her ovaries? Or was there some reason that she had that?
Yeah.
And then you want to take that into consideration on what kind of HRT you're going to do for them,
Sure.
even what kind of supplements or what kind of, anti-aging or longevity inflammation, you morph that to the person's particular, kind of characteristics.
Yeah. It's not, you have 3 dosing options, just pick one and off you go. It's a little bit more, there's a little bit more to it than that. So now would there be, and I asked you about a profile earlier about the hysterectomy profile. So, what would be a reason, granted there's a few, but what are in your mind, the common reasons why a woman would have a total hysterectomy? What age would they be, right? Let's say her name is Stacy. Right. We always like to name these people so it kind of sticks in our brain. So let's say her name is Stacy. She's what age and why did she have a total hysterectomy?
Well, I think that's kind of a big question because I've known people that have had hysterectomies in their 30s for endometriosis. I've known women that have had hysterectomies in their 60s because there happened to be a cyst on their ovary. So they just went in and let's take out those ovaries. And while we're in there, we'll take out the uterus. Or, or even if there's some kind of maybe, the vaginal wall where you can have a rectocele or a cystocele, they'll go in there and, and take out the uterus and pull this up and move that. So really, I wouldn't say is a like a prototype.
Well, no, I don't mean necessarily a prototype, but like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like endometriosis, very painful. Sometimes some of the therapies and treatments don't work that well. So maybe that's what I'm answering my own question, that would be a situation where you would want to probably remove their ovaries, right? Would you not?
Yes. So, I mean, it depends on how much that endometriosis is even on the ovaries. Is it on the colon? Where is it on the appendix? Like, where is it? But I do know a lot of women that have come into my office and they had a previous total hysterectomy because of endometriosis, because those ovaries weren't even doing their thing because that endometriosis was wrapped all over it.
Sure.
But I do feel like there's a lot of treatment for endometriosis other than just taking out everything.
Yeah.
But, when someone's in that kind of pain, they'll do anything.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I know that that's usually the motivator is that they've tried lots of things, nothing really seems to work. And the pain just sort of becomes a little bit unbearable and they just want it to be done. At least as that as a profile, right? That would be a perfect reason and a perfect candidate why rhythmic dosing for them would be, the problem has been removed, right? So you're not going to recreate that necessarily. Because even in your case, you have a little history of that. On paper, you would think that you would not want to restore your cycle. Like that could be potentially bad. Is there a contraindication of anything that you could think of that would negate a woman from doing rhythmic dosing in that respect?
That's really interesting you say that because that comes up all the time. I had endometriosis. I'm afraid to take hormones. My endometriosis is going to come back.
Yeah, fibroids.
But if you think about it back in the day, and this is even for me, when I had endometriosis, oh gosh, we're probably looking at almost 20 years ago. And I've heard this from other doctors and patients is one of the first things a doctor would tell you when you have endometriosis is go have a baby, go get pregnant.
Yeah.
Something about, after you have pregnancy, the endometriosis is better. And you think about it in pregnancy.
How is that even possible?
But in pregnancy, your estradiol levels and progesterone levels are through the roof.
Like 4,500, 4,000,
6,000. I mean, they are just so high. So why would having that level of hormones, pregnancy, make your endometriosis better? That's because it's not really just about the hormones. If anything, I think hormones for somebody that's had endometriosis is probably a really good thing for them. I think overall, now I'm being generalized here, but I feel like endometriosis does have a lot of estrogen dominance to it, does have a lot of detoxification issues with detoxifying your hormones. Of course, there's lots of inflammatory.
In your liver, yeah.
So I feel like, and I've had lots of patients with endometriosis and I've had it and I'm on hormones, is I almost feel like that it could be helpful, but it has to be managed.
Yeah. I mean, in theory, it could sort of go wrong for them. Or if they've had a history of fibroids and they still have a uterus, you technically could sort of wake them up But we've had quite a few women over the years with those types of issues, and it typically does not.
Yeah, because that endometriosis, so it's lining, uterine lining that's outside of the uterus. So it could be, so when you, even if you take out the uterus and you take out the ovaries, it doesn't mean that you cleaned up all the endometriosis. There
Right.
could still be little cells seated in around. So that's the fear is, oh, you give them hormones, then that's going to make it, worse. But I do feel like something about the rhythmic dosing, because you're changing the hormones throughout the month,
Yeah,
is different than just giving someone the same amount of hormones every day.
absolutely. Yeah,
It's just a different concept.
yeah. Because in menopause, a woman's hormone levels go from like this to flatlining, right? And it just drops off. So all you're doing with, static dosing is just raising the flat line, right? The baseline is down here. You test their blood levels before hormones, and it's less than 30 on a estradiol level on a blood test. You're just raising it to, everyone wants their numbers to be at 60, right? That's like the magic number these days. But some of the, sometimes their numbers are even higher than that. So now they're at just a flat, higher level all the time. That's quite a bit different than when your hormones are still mimicking what your ovarian function would normally do.
I will say, having estradiol levels at 60 or 80, you probably, you're still, getting that estrogen into its receptor and having a reaction. It's still different than being at 30.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that, because when you and I first started, hormone, post WHI study, which actually was published when you and I were in school in the early 2000s. And I remember everyone sort of, freaking out, because doctors were freaking out, patients were freaking out, but then women were left with nothing. They're miserable. Their husbands were miserable because they were miserable. Everyone was sort of afraid, but yet suffering sort of at the same time, and no one had really any options. That's really when I think, BHRT at the time. Now everyone just called it HRT now. But at the time, that was sort of the rise of BHRT. So you and I have really seen this evolve over the last 25 years, pretty much from the beginning almost.
Yeah, because I remember you started practice in 2003 and I started in 2004. And I had a lot of women flooding my office because they couldn't have their hormones anymore. I've even had doctors scream at me, like, "Why are you putting this woman on hormones?" I'm like, because her body needs it. And,
Yeah.
but I do feel like it's a little bit of a disservice to those women back, 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that now, now we know, hormones are great. Hormones can really change a woman's life. But these women that have been taken off of their hormones later, because I do find that rhythmic dosing is really good when you're just coming off of, maybe you're on a different type of hormone therapy, your body is already adjusted to it. They would be a good candidate. Somebody that's just going into menopause or coming out of perimenopause into menopause, that's a good time. But somebody that hasn't been on hormones for 15 years, I wouldn't, it would be I don't normally put them on the rhythmic dosing because their bodies have not seen that level of hormones for years. So I feel like, we do have a lot of, newer patients that have been without hormones for so many years because the doctors took it away. And now you can't really put them on the rhythmic dosing because it's too much. And you have to be very careful if you do the static dosing because of, their bodies just don't recognize it anymore.
Yeah. So if someone's over the age of 60 or even 65, starting them on something like that, their body is not used to those hormone levels anymore. Maybe not the best idea. But some women, some women still want to do it. They still want to try it. It is often their choice. How they go about it. Some women are, I wouldn't say forced, but they don't feel the way they want to feel. That's obviously always a big motivator. That's why hot flashes and night sweats gets women to do something because they just don't like how they feel. But I agree that early stage when their body is still responds well and used to having those hormones around, that's the perfect time to kind of get things started. And it would really be the same scenario for that hysterectomy patient, especially if she's in her 30s or 40s, because her body really wants is very much used to those hormones. So now, is there?
Well, let me ask you. So, hysterectomies were really have been really popular in the past. I mean, some women still have them. It's nice that the doctors do opt to leave ovaries in if they're functioning. But I have quite a few rhythmic dosing patients that don't have a uterus,
Yeah.
and they do great. And I never really thought about it, but because the premise is, oh, you're going to get a period, but even if you don't have a uterus, of course, you're not going to get a period. You still get the benefits
Yeah.
of the hormone
Well,
replacement.
and in some ways, from a convenience standpoint, in some ways, it's sort of the best of all the worlds because you get still the hormone dosing, but you just don't have to deal with the period. Which I mean, as a woman, is that a big deal? Is you having a period still? Like some women say, well, I don't. If you ask a woman, with rhythmic dosing, you're going to period. Like, nope, I'm not interested in that. So then automatically they default back to static dosing. If they don't want to have a period, which is their choice, then that sort of option is sort of taken off the table. Is it a big deal for you just to continue and even maybe for the foreseeable future that your period may never stop?
That's so funny you bring that up because maybe it was yesterday or today, this morning, I was thinking about that because when I was younger, they were, I had terrible periods, and the solution was, here, take some birth control pills,
That's still the solution. Yeah.
But I
Now
remember,
I think it's birth control pills or the IUD
Mhm.
or surgery. Those are the three options that women have.
But I remember thinking, I wish I didn't ever have to have my period again. I remember even being a teenager in high school or something, or maybe it was middle school. I don't know. Like, I wish I never had to have a period. I wish I never had to have a period. And here I am at 52, and I'm going to be having a period
Yeah.
again and again and again. But that's the whole thing with the rhythmic dosing is it's not supposed to be a bad period. It's good, easy peasy period, slop off that lining. And I have a lot of women that I talk to, and they like having their period. They feel like it's a reset. It's the beginning of the next cycle. It's the beginning of the next month. And then I have women that say, oh gosh, that sounds annoying. I don't want to deal with that
Yeah, sure.
again.
Yeah, I've heard both. I have some that sort of embrace the idea, maybe there's, there's a youth component to it, like they still feel young and vital. And then there's other ones like, no, I'm done. I've had it for 30 years. I want it to be gone, right? So, hey, that's okay. So the hysterectomy patient then. So it's intended to be a 28-day cycle. So theirs would always be 28 days because you don't have that landmark where yours and other patients, theirs sort of bounce around a little bit. That would be really the only difference, right?
That'd be the only difference. They would do a 28-day cycle continuously. So you go from day one to day 28, back to day one, or like usually I get a period on day 26. So usually I get the period on day 26, that's back to day one.
Yeah.
So everybody's a little bit different. In fact, it's usually right around day 26. And I have a lot of patients, they're perfect at day 28 and they get a period, some at 25, some at 27. I mean, you don't want it to go too long into the 30s, of course.
Yeah. I see it. Honestly, I tend to see it come earlier than later. Like I don't see it for most women once they've been on it for a little while and they obviously have a uterus. I don't see it going too much beyond day 28. If it does, that's usually when we make an adjustment anyways. This is why having a period is actually, now for a dumb man that is trying to deal with a woman's hormones, right? And I'm not the one having to deal with the period, but the period itself provides a lot of information. Like you said, it's supposed to be easy peasy. So if it's a little too heavy, or if there's a lot of cramping, or there's significant PMS, and for everyone that's not watching, I'm like doing air quotes right now. If there's a lot of PMS symptoms, then that tells you and I, or tells the practitioner that something's not quite right. Something needs to be adjusted there because so now when I talk to the rhythmic dosing patients, I say, okay, so the 7 to 10 days or the 7 days before your period, is there any warning signs that it's coming? And like, no, that's actually, I know that it's coming because I know what day it is, right? So I know it's going to be coming, but then it just shows up and then it's, there for, on average. Now this is the question. So is your period now similar to what it used to be when you were younger?
Oh gosh, no. Like I said, my periods were horrible. They were
Okay.
heavy, they were long, they were painful. Mid-cycle, and I'd have mid-cycle pain, ovulation pain from the endometriosis, and
Okay. So now it's
weird spotting. I mean, this is TMI, but back in my early 20s and teens. But no, it's totally different. It's like I said, if I'd had these periods when I was younger, that would have been no problem.
Yeah. Of course, I could see where a woman would be a little bit, if your first inclination was, I want to get my period back, you would automatically assume that it would be as bad as it used to be if it was. So of course you wouldn't want to recreate that.
No, no.
You know,
So that gives, yeah, you're right. The period does give you a lot of insight into terms of dosing and how you're going to do, whether it's rhythmic dosing. If they're having a period and they're on static dosing, that's a big NO. But if they don't have a uterus, so they don't have a period, like I said, the hormones, you still get the benefit from the hormones, but you'd still have to maybe do it, like you said, talk a little bit more about, well, on day 25, 26, 27, how's your mood? Do you feel puffy? Do you feel munchy? Do you get a migraine? Do you get a headache? So you still kind of can pull out a lot of information,
Yeah.
even if they don't have a uterus.
Yeah, I mean, how they feel, this is where it is very subjective. Now, of course, we look at lab work on particular days when we're doing the rhythmic dosing, because we have some, we don't chase the numbers as much or at all really on the static dosing, right? Because, we know there's some limits there. You don't want that estradiol level to be too high. And with the rhythmic dose, we don't want it to be too high either. But the subjective, how that woman feels, tells us sort of what we want to know, right? That tells us if those levels need to be adjusted, because it should be relatively, smooth. She should feel the way she wants to feel, have energy. Her brain should work. Temperature should be stable. She should be able to sleep well at night. That's pretty nice. So. Is there anything else that we, need to discuss about, rhythmic dosing, which really, like I said, it's more convenient, if anything. There's certainly no contraindications. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on about this topic?
No, I don't think so. I know we did a few other podcasts about like surgical menopause and total hysterectomies, oophorectomies. But I'd say for this, I just liked the comment. I thought it was a great comment.
Yeah. Well, I know we did one similar to this a while back. So if I can find the link, I'll have the link put up somewhere in the, up in the
ethers.
Yeah. There's like, you put a little tab up there, like on the upper, if you're looking at the screen, I don't know, we'll have someone, one of our video people put the link up there. I see those on a bunch of other videos. So then you just, kind of go down the rabbit's hole. But I know we touched on this one before. But it, the comment, like I said, on TikTok just came in, and I think it's something that, they say when you're too close to the forest to see the trees, you don't realize that would be a question that somebody would actually have.
It's a great valid question. In fact, she asked, so if you had a total hysterectomy, can you still do this and it help? And she also had asked, can this help? Absolutely. It depends on, like I said at the very beginning of this podcast, what your goals are. Are we going to work on bone density? Are we going to work on, what's your family history? What's your personal history? You're pulling that all together so you can come up with the right protocol for that person.
Yeah. Longevity in general, right? Maintaining that quality of life. That's what when women have been on it for a while, and they just feel good, right? There's really not much to quantify, or not really much to really worry about when you just feel a certain way. That's what we're shooting for with those rhythmic dosing patients, because they feel the difference, because they have come from somewhere else, or they're dealing with the symptoms of menopause anyways. And they're like, I feel great. I don't have really anything to complain about. That's like, best case scenario. So if you have any questions about this or rhythmic dosing, or just about hormones in general, you can always comment down below. If you're on YouTube, of course, if you're on one of the audio podcast platforms, maybe visit our website. Yeah. You mentioned the in-betweener, type profile. We are putting together a course, like a little mini free course about the in-betweener. So we'll have more details on that. Probably another episode in the shortcoming, but just kind of finishing up a few details before we actually make it go live. Any last final comments? Are we good?
Nope, this is great.
All right. Till next time, I'm Dr. Maki.
And I'm Dr. Valorie.
Take care. Bye-bye.